My name is Amber Wilson, and I'm 26 years old. Last Christmas, my entire world shattered when my father stood up during our family dinner and called me a leech in front of everyone. "You can't stay here anymore," he announced, his voice cold as the Michigan winter outside. 2 years after moving back home following my mother's death, I found myself homeless on Christmas Day. The cruelty of those words, spoken over turkey and cranberry sauce, changed everything. I never imagined my own father would discard me so easily, or that this rock-bottom moment would become the foundation for rebuilding my life. Before I tell you how I went from homeless on Christmas to building a life I never thought possible, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and subscribe to join me on this journey of healing and redemption. Growing up in Lansing, Michigan, my childhood had been relatively normal. We lived in a comfortable 4-bedroom house in a nice suburban neighborhood with manicured lawns and friendly neighbors. My mother, Sarah, was the heart of our family, warm, compassionate, and always ready with a hug or homemade cookies. She worked as a kindergarten teacher, beloved by generations of children who passed through her classroom. My father, Robert, was more reserved, working long hours as an accountant at a respectable firm downtown. While he wasn't demonstrative with his affection, I never doubted he loved me in his own quiet way. Our family dynamics weren't perfect, whose are, but there was stability. Dad provided financially while Mom created the emotional foundation of our home. I was an only child, which meant I received plenty of attention, but also felt the full weight of my parents' expectations. I did well enough in high school to get accepted to Michigan State University. College was going fine, not spectacularly, but I maintained a 3.2 GPA and was slowly figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. I was leaning toward communications or marketing, something that would let me use my creative and social skills. Then during my junior year, everything changed. Mom was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer. The disease moved quickly, giving us barely enough time to process what was happening. I immediately took a leave of absence from college to help care for her. Those 8 months were a blur of hospital visits, medication schedules, and watching my vibrant mother fade away. She fought hard but passed away just after my 23rd birthday. The loss devastated both Dad and me, but we grieved differently. I wanted to talk about Mom, to remember her and process my pain openly. Dad retreated into himself, throwing himself into work and avoiding the empty spaces in our home that once held Mom's laughter. The distance between us grew wider with each passing month. Just when I thought things couldn't get more difficult, Dad introduced Melissa. They had met at a widower's support group, and their relationship progressed rapidly. Within a year of Mom's death, they were engaged. I tried to be supportive. Dad deserved happiness after all, but something about Melissa never felt right to me. Melissa was 15 years younger than my father, with sleek blonde hair and a perpetual smile that never quite reached her eyes. She worked in real estate and always dressed impeccably. On the surface, she was friendly, but there was a calculating quality to her interactions with me. She would make subtle comments that undermined my confidence or question my choices, always when Dad wasn't within earshot. "Oh, you're still looking for a job? I thought someone with your education would have more options, or your mother certainly kept this house in better shape, didn't she?" They married 18 months after Mom died, in a ceremony that felt rushed and impersonal. Melissa quickly redecorated our family home, removing most traces of Mom except for one small photo Dad insisted on keeping in his office. I felt like a stranger in my own home. By this point, I had tried to restart my education, but grief had tanked my motivation. After 2 failed semesters, I decided to take a longer break and focus on finding work instead. But the job market was tough, especially for someone with an incomplete degree and a spotty resume due to caretaking. I bounced between retail positions and restaurant work, never making enough to afford my own place in our increasingly expensive area. With my savings dwindling and rental prices soaring, Dad reluctantly suggested I move back home, just until you get on your feet. What was meant to be a few months stretched into nearly 2 years. I contributed what I could, paying a small amount for rent when I was working, helping with household chores, and trying to stay out of Melissa's way. My depression, which had begun after Mom's death, worsened with each passing month. Some days it was hard to even get out of bed. I saw a therapist when I could afford it, but consistency was difficult with my precarious finances. The grief counselor I had seen briefly after Mom died had warned me that the second year after losing someone is often harder than the first. The shock wears off, but the permanence of the loss sets in. She was right. 6 months before that fateful Christmas, I had finally found something stable, a receptionist position at a local dental office. The pay wasn't great, but it was consistent, and I was slowly saving for my own apartment. I created a budget, calculated how long it would take to save for a security deposit and first month's rent, and set a goal to move out by spring. Things were finally looking up. But at home, tensions were mounting. Melissa had begun making comments to my father when she thought I couldn't hear them about how I was taking advantage, how I was stunting my own growth by staying comfortable at home, how I wasn't trying hard enough. Dad, who had always been susceptible to strong personalities, Mom had definitely been the decision-maker in their marriage, began to echo these sentiments in his conversations with me. "When I was your age, I already had a career and a mortgage," he would say, conveniently forgetting that housing prices had tripled since then and wages had stagnated. "Your mother would want you to be independent by now," was another favorite, weaponizing Mom's memory against me. Still, I persisted. I picked up extra shifts when available. I applied for better positions in the evenings. I kept my head down and tried to make myself useful around the house. And I planned for a special Christmas, hoping the holiday spirit might soften the growing coldness between us. I bought thoughtful gifts, decorated the house the way Mom used to, and even prepared some of her traditional recipes. I thought if I could just remind Dad of our family bonds, of who we had been before, maybe things could improve. I was wrong. December 25th started with such promise. I woke early to prepare Mom's special cinnamon rolls, the ones she made every Christmas morning throughout my childhood. The house was beautifully decorated. I had spent hours hanging garlands, setting up the tree, and placing Mom's cherished ornament collection just right. The snow falling outside created the perfect holiday backdrop. Dad and Melissa came downstairs around 9, Dad offering a brief "Merry Christmas," while Melissa merely nodded in my direction. Still, I remained optimistic. The extended family would arrive at 3 for dinner, and I hoped their presence would bring warmth back into our home. I had spent days preparing turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce, all of Mom's recipes, made with care from her handwritten recipe cards I'd managed to save before Melissa reorganized the kitchen. Dad seemed touched when he realized what I had done, even commenting that the stuffing smelled just like Sarah's. It was the first time he had mentioned Mom by name in months. By 3 o'clock, the house was filled with family members. Dad's sister Patricia arrived with her husband George and their college-age twins. Dad's brother Thomas came with his new girlfriend. Several cousins and their families completed our gathering of about 15 people. The atmosphere lightened with their arrival, conversations flowed, Christmas music played softly in the background, and for a moment, it felt like a real family Christmas again. Dinner was served at 5. Everyone complimented the food, with several relatives commenting on how I had captured Mom's recipes perfectly. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of belonging. Even Dad seemed relaxed, sharing stories from past Christmases that included fond memories of Mom. Melissa remained quiet through these reminiscences, her smile growing more strained. After dinner came the gift exchange. I had spent more than I should have, wanting to give thoughtful presents despite my limited budget. For Dad, I had found a first edition of his favorite mystery novel at a used bookstore and spent hours restoring its worn cover. For Melissa, an expensive scarf from a brand she had mentioned liking. I received a few nice gifts in return, mostly practical items like a gas card and some clothes. The evening seemed to be going well as we moved to the living room for dessert and coffee. I served Mom's famous pecan pie, and conversation turned to plans for the new year. "I've been saving up," I shared during a lull in conversation. "I should have enough for my own place by March or April. I've been looking at some apartments about 20 minutes from here." I expected my announcement to be met with approval or encouragement. Instead, my father abruptly stood up, his chair scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at him. His face had flushed red, a vein pulsing at his temple, a warning sign I recognized from rare moments of anger in my childhood. "Why wait until March?" he said, his voice unnervingly calm despite his flushed appearance. "Amber, you're 26 years old. You're a leech. You can't stay here anymore. I want you out by New Year's." The silence that followed was deafening. I felt as if I'd been physically struck, my breath catching painfully in my chest. 15 pairs of eyes darted between my father and me, witnessing my humiliation. Melissa stared at her dessert plate, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Robert." Aunt Patricia finally broke the silence, her voice sharp with shock. "What on earth are you saying?" "I'm saying what should have been said months ago," Dad continued, still standing. "She's been taking advantage of our generosity for too long. It's time for her to grow up and stand on her own 2 feet. Uncle Thomas stood now too, placing a gentle hand on my father's shoulder. "Rob, come on, man. Let's take a minute here. It's Christmas." I remained frozen, unable to speak or even cry as my world collapsed around me. The room began to spin slightly, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "I've given her plenty of time," Dad continued, shrugging off Thomas's hand. "She's had a job for 6 months. If she hasn't saved enough for her own place, that's her problem, not mine." "Robert, she's your daughter," Patricia said, her voice rising. "And after everything with Sarah." "Don't bring Sarah into this," Dad snapped. "Sarah would agree with me. She's been coddled enough." That broke my paralysis. The mention of Mom, the suggestion that she would approve of this cruelty, cut deeper than anything else. I pushed back my chair and stood on shaky legs. "Mom would never," I began, but my voice cracked and I couldn't continue. "You have 1 week," Dad said, refusing to meet my eyes. "Figure it out." I walked out of the dining room with as much dignity as I could muster, feeling the weight of my family's stares on my back. As I reached the hallway, I heard Melissa's voice, barely lowered. "She's been taking advantage for too long. You did the right thing, Robert." I ran up the stairs to my bedroom, the same room I'd had since childhood, though Melissa had redecorated it in sterile beige shortly after moving in. Closing the door, I finally allowed the tears to come, muffling my sobs with a pillow so no one downstairs would hear. Through the floor, I could hear the uncomfortable shuffling of family members making excuses to leave early. Car doors slammed in the driveway. Someone, Uncle Thomas, I thought, raised his voice again at my father, though I couldn't make out the words. My phone buzzed with text messages from my cousins. "Are you okay? That was so messed up. Do you need a place to stay?" I couldn't bring myself to respond to any of them. The humiliation was too raw, too complete. 20 minutes later, a soft knock came at my door. I didn't answer, but Aunt Patricia entered anyway, her face creased with concern. "Amber, honey," she said, sitting beside me on the bed. "Thomas is still downstairs trying to talk sense into your father. This is insane. He can't just throw you out with a week's notice on Christmas." "Apparently he can," I whispered, my voice hoarse from crying. "You can stay with us if you need to," she offered, though I could hear the hesitation in her voice. My cousins were home from college for the holidays, their house already full. "Thank you," I said, not wanting to point out the impracticality of her offer. "I'll figure something out." After Patricia left, promising to call tomorrow, I spent the night staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction with my father over the past 2 years, wondering where things had gone so wrong. Had I truly been taking advantage? I'd contributed financially when I could, helped around the house, tried to stay out of the way. Was that not enough? Or was Melissa right? Had I overstayed my welcome, become a burden? As the night stretched endlessly before me, one thing became clear: I couldn't stay in this house a moment longer than necessary. Whatever happened next, I needed to leave. Morning arrived after a sleepless night, my eyes swollen and my body aching with exhaustion. The house was eerily quiet as I made my way downstairs, half hoping last night had been a terrible dream. But the tension hanging in the air confirmed the reality. My own father had disowned me on Christmas Day. Dad sat at the kitchen table reading the newspaper, not looking up when I entered. Melissa stood at the counter, pouring coffee and humming a cheerful tune as if nothing had happened. I moved silently to the refrigerator, taking out orange juice and pouring myself a glass with trembling hands. "Good morning," Melissa said brightly. "Sleep well." I didn't respond, unable to engage in her pretense of normalcy. Dad rustled his newspaper, still not acknowledging my presence. "So," Melissa continued, leaning against the counter, "I've printed out some information that might be helpful for you." She pushed a small stack of papers across the counter toward me. "There's a women's shelter downtown that takes emergency cases and information about applying for welfare benefits." I stared at the papers, nausea rising in my throat. She had prepared these before Christmas dinner. This had been planned. "I don't need a shelter," I managed to say, pushing the papers back without touching them. "I'll figure something out." "Suit yourself," Melissa shrugged, her helpfulness vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. "But the New Year's deadline stands." Dad finally lowered his newspaper, his expression unreadable. "Your Aunt Patricia called this morning. She's upset." "I wonder why," I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "This isn't easy for anyone," he replied, as if he were the victim in this situation. "But it's for the best. You need to stand on your own 2 feet. On 6 days' notice? At Christmas." "You've had 2 years," he said, returning to his newspaper, ending the conversation. I retreated back upstairs, pulled out my phone, and began making calls. The first was to Jessica, my best friend from high school. We had drifted apart over the years, but still kept in touch. "Oh my God, that's horrible," she said after I explained the situation. "Of course you can stay with me for a few days while you figure things out. I have a pull-out couch." Relief washed over me. At least I wouldn't be on the street. I called my landlord at the dental office next, explaining that I needed some emergency personal days. She was understanding, giving me until after New Year's before I needed to return. Then I began packing. It was surreal, sorting through 26 years of life to determine what would fit in my car. Clothes came first, then toiletries and essential documents. My laptop and phone charger. A few precious photos of Mom that I'd kept in my room. I had to leave furniture, books, childhood mementos. There simply wasn't space. As I was folding sweaters into a suitcase, I found a photo album tucked at the back of my closet. Pictures from my childhood that I'd hidden away after Melissa moved in and redecorated. I opened it to a random page and saw Mom and me at the beach, both of us laughing as waves crashed around our knees. Dad had taken that picture. We had been happy then, a real family. The tears came again, and this time I let them flow freely. I was mourning not just my mother now, but the loss of my father too, not to death, but to something that felt equally permanent. By evening, my car was packed with everything I could fit. I stood in my childhood bedroom one last time, now stripped of anything that marked it as mine. Part of me wanted to wait until the 1-week deadline to take every moment I was entitled to. But I couldn't bear another silent breakfast, another night under the same roof as people who had rejected me so completely. I carried my last bag downstairs, finding Dad and Melissa in the living room watching television as if it were any ordinary evening. I stood in the doorway, bag in hand, until Dad finally looked up. "I'm leaving," I said simply. "Already?" Melissa asked, feigning surprise. "You have until New Year's." "I'd rather not stay where I'm not wanted." The words came out steadier than I felt. Dad muted the TV and stood up, awkwardly shifting his weight. For a moment, I thought he might change his mind, might apologize, or at least offer a proper goodbye. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "Here," he said, holding it out to me. "It's not much, but it should help with a security deposit." I stared at the envelope, torn between desperate need and burning pride. In the end, need won out. I took it without a word, not opening it in their presence. "Take care of yourself, Amber," he said, his voice carrying a finality that made my heart constrict. "Goodbye, Dad," I replied, turning toward the door before he could see the tears threatening again. As I walked out into the cold December night, I glanced back at the house, the only home I'd ever known. Through the window, I could see my father still standing where I'd left him, watching me go. His expression was unreadable. Was it regret I saw, or simply relief that I was finally gone. I got into my car, turned the key, and drove away from my past, with no clear idea of where my future lay. Jessica's apartment was tiny, a one-bedroom in an older building with thin walls and temperamental heating. She had cleared space for me on her couch, providing a pillow and some blankets that smelled faintly of her cat. That first night, I lay awake until dawn, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the building and trying to process how dramatically my life had changed in 24 hours. "You can stay as long as you need," Jessica assured me over coffee the next morning. "Well, within reason. Marcus moves in next month, so we'll have to figure something out by then." Marcus was her boyfriend of 6 months, a detail she hadn't mentioned when offering her couch. I nodded gratefully anyway, knowing I had few alternatives. "Have you thought about what you're going to do?" she asked, stirring sugar into her mug. "Maybe your dad will calm down and change his mind." "I'm not going back there," I said firmly. Even if he begged, I couldn't live in that house again. "Then you need a plan," Jessica said, shifting into problem-solving mode. "Your job doesn't pay enough for an apartment around here, right?" I shook my head. The dental receptionist position paid just above minimum wage, and rental prices in our area had skyrocketed in recent years. Even the smallest studio apartments required income 3 times the monthly rent, a threshold I couldn't meet. "Maybe you could get a roommate situation? Or move somewhere cheaper." "I'm looking," I assured her. "I just need a little time." But time was a luxury I didn't have. By day 3 on Jessica's couch, the atmosphere had already shifted. Marcus came over and made little effort to hide his annoyance at my presence. They would whisper in the kitchen, their conversation stopping abruptly when I entered the room. On day 5, Jessica sat down beside me with a sympathetic expression I was coming to dread. "So, Marcus is concerned about his privacy when he moves in," she began, not quite meeting my eyes. "We're thinking that maybe 2 weeks is a reasonable timeline for you to find something else?" 2 weeks. I nodded, thanking her for her generosity while panic bloomed in my chest. I returned to work after New Year's, maintaining a professional demeanor while frantically searching for housing options during lunch breaks and after hours. I called other friends, but received a series of gentle rejections. "We just don't have the space right now. Our lease doesn't allow long-term guests. It's just not a good time." The envelope my father had given me contained $1,500, enough for a security deposit, but not enough for the income requirements of most apartments. I expanded my search to areas further from work, looking at long commutes and questionable neighborhoods. Nothing was affordable. By the end of Jessica's 2-week timeline, I still had nowhere to go. In desperation, I used my credit card to book a week at a budget motel off the highway, a depressing place with stained carpets and a persistent smell of cigarettes despite the no smoking signs. The nightly rate was destroying my finances, but it bought me time. I continued going to work each day, careful to maintain my appearance so no one would suspect I was essentially homeless. I showered at the motel in the mornings, kept my work clothes hanging in my car to prevent wrinkles, and pretended everything was normal. But nothing was normal. My credit card was approaching its limit. The dental office wasn't scheduling enough patients in the winter months, cutting my hours. And the motel manager had informed me they were fully booked for an upcoming convention. I needed to check out in 3 days. In desperation, I joined a 24-hour gym, not for fitness, but for reliable shower access. When the motel deadline arrived, I began sleeping in my car, parking in different Walmart lots each night where overnight parking was permitted. January in Michigan meant temperatures well below freezing. I ran the car heater in short bursts to avoid draining the battery or running out of gas, but still spent most nights shivering under layers of clothing and blankets. Each morning, I would drive to the gym to shower and get ready for work, then sit in my car in the dental office parking lot, applying for jobs on my phone until my shift started. I applied for anything that paid more than my current position, administrative roles, customer service, even entry-level positions at factories in the area. The responses were almost universally the same. "We've decided to pursue candidates whose qualifications more closely match our needs." My mental state deteriorated with each passing day. Sleep deprivation clouded my thinking. Constant anxiety about where I would sleep, whether my car would start, if I had enough gas to stay warm. These worries consumed me. I lost weight as I cut back on food to save money, existing on protein bars and fast food dollar menus. The final blow came 3 weeks after Christmas, when my car, a 12-year-old Honda with over 150,000 miles, made an ominous grinding noise and refused to start one morning. I was parked at a truck stop, miles from the gym or my workplace, with no money for repairs. I called a tow truck using the last of my credit card's available balance, had the car taken to a mechanic, and took an expensive Uber to work, arriving late and disheveled. The diagnosis came during my lunch break. The timing belt had broken, damaging the engine in the process. Repairs would cost more than the car was worth. That night, with no car to sleep in and temperatures dropping to single digits, I faced a decision I'd been avoiding. I walked into the women's shelter Melissa had so smugly recommended, swallowing my pride and accepting that I had no alternatives left. The shelter was clean but institutional, with bunk beds lined up in a large room offering no privacy. The staff were kind but overworked, the other residents a mix of women escaping domestic violence, struggling with addiction, or simply victims of poverty and bad luck like myself. I was assigned a top bunk, given a small toiletry kit, and shown where to store the few belongings I could carry from my now useless car. For 3 nights, I barely slept, clutching my purse containing my ID and phone to my chest, listening to the sobs and occasional arguments of the women around me. During the day, I continued going to work, catching buses and hiding my situation from coworkers. But my appearance had begun to suffer: wrinkled clothes, dark circles under my eyes, a persistent exhaustion that made concentrating difficult. On the 4th day, I sat in the employee bathroom at the dental office during lunch, staring at my reflection in the mirror. I barely recognized the gaunt, hollow-eyed woman staring back at me. Something broke inside, and I began to sob uncontrollably, trying desperately to muffle the sound with paper towels. That's how Madison, one of the dental hygienists, found me huddled on the bathroom floor, crying so hard I could barely breathe. "Amber," she asked, kneeling beside me with concern. "What's wrong? Are you sick?" I shook my head, unable to speak through the sobs. "Hey, it's okay," she said, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Whatever it is, we can figure it out." "No," I finally managed. "You can't fix this." "Try me," she replied, sitting down on the bathroom floor beside me, seemingly unconcerned about her scrubs touching the tile. "I'm a pretty good problem solver." In that moment of complete breakdown, with nothing left to lose, I told her everything. Madison listened without interruption as I poured out my story: the Christmas dinner disaster, my father's rejection, the progressive loss of everything stable in my life. When I finished, embarrassment flooded through me. I just confessed to being homeless to a coworker I barely knew outside of polite office conversation. "I'm sorry," I said, wiping my face with damp paper towels. "I shouldn't have dumped all that on you." "Don't apologize," Madison replied firmly. "What happened to you is awful, and it's not your fault." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I have a spare bedroom." I looked up at her, certain I'd misheard. "What?" "I have a spare bedroom," she repeated. "It's small, really just an office with a futon, but it's yours if you want it. At least until you get back on your feet." "You can't be serious," I said. "You barely know me." "I know enough," she shrugged. "You're reliable, you're kind to patients, and you're obviously going through hell right now. I've been there, not exactly the same situation, but I know what it's like to have nowhere to go." I stared at her, searching for signs of pity or insincerity, but found only genuine concern. Still, I hesitated. "I can't pay much rent right now." "We'll figure that out later," she interrupted. "For now, let's just get you somewhere safe to sleep that isn't a shelter or your car." That evening, after our shifts ended, Madison drove me to the shelter to collect my few belongings, then to her apartment in a modest complex about 20 minutes from the dental office. It wasn't fancy, a 2-bedroom unit with mismatched furniture and brightly colored throw pillows, but it was warm, clean, and felt safe in a way nothing had since Christmas. My girlfriend Riley will be home soon, Madison explained as she showed me to the spare room. She works in tech, does something with computers that I pretend to understand. The room was small but comfortable, with a futon, a small desk, and a bookshelf crammed with paperbacks and gaming equipment. Madison provided clean sheets and towels, showed me where everything was in the bathroom, and then, most wonderfully, gave me privacy for the first time in weeks. I sat on the edge of the futon, overwhelmed by the sudden change in my circumstances. Part of me was waiting for the catch, for Madison to reveal what she expected in return for this generosity. But another part, a tiny spark that had nearly been extinguished during my weeks of homelessness, dared to hope that this might be a genuine lifeline. I showered a long, hot shower without the time limits of the gym or shelter and changed into clean clothes. When I emerged, I heard voices in the kitchen. Madison was talking with a woman I assumed was Riley, their tones hushed but animated. I approached hesitantly, not wanting to intrude. Madison spotted me and waved me over. "Amber, this is Riley." Riley Amber. Riley was tall and lanky, with short dark hair and glasses. She smiled warmly, extending her hand. "Nice to meet you." Madison filled me in a bit. "That's a rough situation." "Thank you for letting me stay," I said, feeling awkward and intrusive. "I promise it won't be for long." "Stay as long as you need," Riley replied easily. "We've both had our share of hard times. Sometimes you just need someone to catch you when you fall." That first dinner in their apartment was the first proper meal I'd had in weeks, homemade stir-fry with actual vegetables, not fast food or shelter provisions. The conversation flowed surprisingly easily, with Madison and Riley sharing stories about how they met at a local board game meetup and their jobs. "So what would you be doing if life hadn't thrown you this curveball?" Riley asked as we cleared the dishes. "I don't know," I admitted. "I was just trying to save enough for my own place. I never really got to finish college after Mom got sick." "Any interest in going back?" Madison asked. I shrugged. "Eventually, maybe. But right now I need better income more than education." "What about tech?" Riley suggested. "The field is always looking for people, and there are shorter paths than a 4-year degree. I teach a free intro to coding workshop at the library on Saturdays, if you want to check it out." I nodded politely, but privately doubted my ability to learn something as complex as programming while my life was still in shambles. Over the next week, a routine developed. I continued working at the dental office, contributing what I could to household expenses, and slowly regained my equilibrium. The constant anxiety of homelessness began to recede, replaced by cautious planning for the future. Madison helped me apply for community college courses that would start in the summer semester. The dental office gave me more hours as patient bookings increased. And, somewhat to my surprise, I found myself sitting in the public library on a Saturday morning, attending Riley's coding workshop. It was a small group, about 10 people of various ages and backgrounds. Riley was a patient teacher, breaking down complex concepts into manageable pieces. "Try this exercise," she said, coming to look over my shoulder at the simple HTML page I was creating. "You've got a knack for this. Your code is very organized." "Really?" I asked, surprised by the compliment. Organization had never been my strongest trait. "Really," she confirmed. "You should consider pursuing this further. There's a good bootcamp program that offers scholarships." By the end of January, I had attended 4 of Riley's workshops and found myself unexpectedly enjoying the logical problem-solving of basic programming. It was structured in a way that my life hadn't been for years, with clear problems and solutions. Riley began mentoring me informally, giving me additional exercises and resources. Meanwhile, Madison's mother Nancy, who worked in administration at the local hospital, mentioned an opening for an administrative assistant in the radiology department, a position that paid nearly double my receptionist's salary and offered benefits. "You should apply," Madison encouraged. "Mom says the hiring manager owes her a favor. At least get an interview." With nothing to lose, I updated my resume, emphasizing my organizational skills and experience handling patient information at the dental office. Nancy personally delivered my application to the hiring manager, and to my shock, I received a call for an interview 2 days later. The interview was nerve-wracking, but my experiences had given me a new perspective. After sleeping in my car and at a shelter, answering questions about filing systems and scheduling software seemed manageable. I spoke honestly about my desire for stability and growth opportunities and my willingness to learn new systems. A week later, I received the job offer, $17.50 an hour with health insurance, paid vacation, and a 401k match. It was more than I'd ever earned before. See, Madison said when I shared the news, tears of relief streaming down my face. Things are turning around. With a steady income on the horizon, I could finally plan for true independence. I scoured roommate listings and found a potential match, Emily, a nurse at the same hospital, looking to share a 2-bedroom apartment about 10 minutes from work. The rent would be tight but manageable with my new salary. By mid-February, less than 2 months after being thrown out at Christmas dinner, I was moving into my new shared apartment. Madison and Riley helped me carry the few belongings I had, plus some household items they insisted I take, a spare set of dishes, some cooking utensils, a lamp. "I don't know how to thank you both," I said as we stood in my new bedroom, small but mine, with a real bed Madison had found on a Buy Nothing group. "Pay it forward someday," Riley replied. "That's how the world should work." That night, my first in the new apartment, I received a text from my father. "Heard you got a hospital job. Are you ready to admit you needed the push? You can come to dinner Sunday if you've learned your lesson." I stared at the message for a long time, feeling a complex mix of anger, hurt, and something new, indignation. After everything I'd been through, he was framing his cruelty as tough love, expecting gratitude for the trauma he'd caused. I didn't respond. Instead, I blocked his number and went to sleep in my new bed, in my new room, looking forward to my new job starting Monday. It wasn't perfect. I was still living paycheck to paycheck, sharing space with a stranger, and healing from deep emotional wounds. But for the first time since that Christmas dinner, I felt something close to hope. The hospital job marked the beginning of true stability. The work itself wasn't particularly exciting, scheduling appointments, filing paperwork, answering phones, but it provided structure and security I hadn't experienced in years. Having health insurance meant I could afford regular therapy sessions, finally addressing the grief and trauma that had accumulated since Mom's death. Emily, my roommate, turned out to be an ideal living partner, busy with her nursing shifts, respectful of my space, and generally easy to get along with. We weren't close friends, but we developed a comfortable coexistence, occasionally sharing meals or watching movies together on rare evenings when both of us were home and off work. I continued attending Riley's coding workshops, gradually progressing from basic HTML and CSS to more complex JavaScript. The logical nature of programming provided a strange comfort. Unlike the messy, emotional aspects of life, code either worked or it didn't. There were clear problems and clear solutions. "You really do have an aptitude for this," Riley remarked one evening when I'd come over for dinner with her and Madison. "Have you thought about pursuing it more seriously?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "But I can't afford to quit my job for a boot camp, and I don't have a computer that could handle serious development work." 2 days later, Riley presented me with a refurbished laptop. "It's not the newest model, but it'll run everything you need for learning. Consider it an investment in your future." With proper equipment and Riley's continued mentorship, I began spending evenings and weekends working through online coding courses. The hospital's regular hours meant I could maintain a consistent study schedule, slowly building skills that might someday translate to a new career. About 3 months after starting at the hospital, I received a card in the mail with no return address. Inside was a brief note from my maternal grandmother Eleanor, whom I hadn't seen since Mom's funeral. Dad and Melissa had gradually distanced us from Mom's side of the family, making excuses about busy schedules whenever invitations came. "Amber," the note read, "I've been trying to reach you. Your number is no longer working. Please call me." It included a phone number and was signed simply, "Love, Grandma L." I called that evening, nervous about what she might say. Had Dad been feeding her his version of events? "Amber, sweetheart," she answered, her voice exactly as I remembered, warm and slightly husky from years of smoking before she quit. "I've been so worried. Your cousin Rachel told me what happened at Christmas. You heard about that? I felt a flush of shame, imagining how the story must have spread through the family. Yes, and I've been trying to find you ever since. Your father, she paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. Your father isn't being truthful about what happened. He told me you'd moved out on your own and were refusing to speak to him. I knew that didn't sound like you. We talked for over an hour, catching up on the past 3 years. I learned that Melissa had systematically prevented Grandma Elle's calls and visits after Mom died, always making excuses about why it wasn't a good time. Dad had apparently claimed I was too fragile for contact with Mom's family, using my grief as an excuse for isolation. Your mother would be furious, Grandma Elle said. She always worried about Robert's tendency to be influenced by strong personalities. First it was his mother, then it was Sarah herself, and now this woman. What do you mean? I asked, surprised by this characterization of my father, whom I'd always seen as somewhat stern and authoritative. Oh, honey, she sighed. Your father has always needed someone to tell him what to think. Your mother knew exactly how to handle him. She was gentle about it, always made him feel like the decisions were his. But she worried what would happen if something happened to her. That's why she was so focused on you being independent. This revelation shifted my understanding of my parents' relationship and my father's behavior. It didn't excuse what he'd done, but it helped explain the dramatic personality change after Mom's death and his rapid capitulation to Melissa's influence. Grandma Elle insisted on seeing me, and we arranged to meet for lunch that weekend. When I saw her at the restaurant, the resemblance to Mom hit me hard. They had the same smile, the same way of tilting their head when listening. I broke down before we even ordered appetizers. I miss her so much, I sobbed, not caring about the curious glances from nearby tables. I know, sweetheart, she said, reaching across to squeeze my hand. I do too, every single day. That lunch became a weekly tradition. Sometimes we talked about Mom, sharing memories and stories. Other times, we focused on the present and future. Grandma Elle was surprisingly tech-savvy for a woman in her 70s, fascinated by my coding projects and full of encouragement. She also offered occasional financial help, nothing extravagant, but enough to ease the constant pressure of living paycheck to paycheck. When I initially refused, she was firm. Your mother would want me to help. Besides, I'm not getting any younger, and I'd rather see you enjoy my money than wait until I'm gone to inherit it. 6 months after starting at the hospital, I had saved enough for a reliable used car, nothing fancy, but dependable transportation that expanded my world beyond bus routes. Having mobility again increased my job options and social opportunities. Riley had been encouraging me to attend local tech meetups, insisting that networking was as important as technical skills in the industry. With my car, I could finally reach these events, often held in locations poorly served by public transportation. At one such meetup, focused on web development, I met Zach, a former high school classmate who had gone on to major in computer science and now worked for a local tech startup. Amber Wilson, he asked, squinting at my name tag. From Lansing High? What are you doing here? I explained my journey into coding, leaving out the personal details about homelessness and family rejection. Zach seemed impressed by my self-teaching efforts. We're actually looking for a junior developer, he mentioned. Someone who can help with front-end work, HTML, CSS, JavaScript. The pay's not amazing for the industry, but it's a foot in the door. You should apply. That night, I updated my resume, emphasizing the projects I'd completed under Riley's guidance. I created a simple portfolio website showcasing my work, staying up until 3 a.m. perfecting it before submitting my application. The interview process was intimidating, a technical assessment that pushed the limits of my self-taught knowledge, followed by interviews with team members including Zach. I left certain I had failed, especially when asked about algorithms I'd never encountered. To my shock, they called with an offer a week later. The salary was nearly double what I made at the hospital, enough to afford a small apartment on my own if I wanted. The position included full benefits and, most importantly, mentorship and professional development. They liked your problem-solving approach, Riley explained when I shared the news, bewildered by my success. Technical skills can be taught, but the right mindset is harder to find. Leaving the hospital was bittersweet. I had found stability there when I desperately needed it, and Nancy had been instrumental in getting me the position. But the opportunity ahead represented more than just financial improvement. It was a chance at a career with growth potential, something I hadn't dared to imagine 6 months earlier. My first day at the tech startup was overwhelming: new faces, new terminology, and the persistent fear that they would realize I didn't belong. But my colleagues were patient, the onboarding process was structured, and gradually I found my footing. The work challenged me intellectually in ways my previous jobs never had. Each day brought new problems to solve, new skills to learn. I made mistakes, of course, but the senior developers provided guidance rather than criticism. For the first time since college, I felt my mind expanding, growing to meet new challenges. With my improved financial situation, I decided to find my own place when the lease with Emily ended. I found a small one-bedroom apartment in an older building, nothing luxurious, but clean, safe, and most importantly, mine alone. After years of living in other spaces, my father's house, Jessica's couch, Madison and Riley's spare room, the shared apartment with Emily, having a space that belonged only to me felt revolutionary. I furnished it slowly, scouring thrift stores and marketplace listings for affordable pieces. Grandma L contributed a few family items: a quilt Mom had made in her 20s, the reading lamp from Mom's bedside table that Dad had relegated to the basement. These treasures connected me to my past while I built my future. As the one-year anniversary of that disastrous Christmas dinner approached, I received a letter from Aunt Patricia. Inside was a family update: cousins graduating, Uncle Thomas getting engaged to his girlfriend, and a brief note about my father. "Robert and Melissa are having problems," she wrote. "He won't admit it, but I think he regrets what happened with you. Pride is keeping him from reaching out. If you wanted to contact him, I think he would welcome it." I folded the letter and put it away, unsure how to feel. Part of me still ached for reconciliation, for the father I remembered from childhood. But another part, stronger now, recognized that the relationship had been unhealthy long before that Christmas dinner. My father had failed to protect me when I was vulnerable, had prioritized his new wife over his grieving daughter. Could I really trust him again? I decided not to reach out, at least not yet. Instead, I focused on the life I was building, my growing career, my strengthening relationships with Madison, Riley, and Grandma L, my peaceful apartment that represented hard-won independence. The night of the anniversary, I sat alone in my apartment, reflecting on the year's journey. From homelessness to homeownership, well, renting, but it was mine. From desperation to determination, from victim to survivor. The path hadn't been straight or easy, but each step, even the painful ones, had brought me here. I opened my laptop and began typing, not code this time, but my story. Perhaps sharing it might help someone else facing similar circumstances. Perhaps it might help me process the experience. Or perhaps it would simply serve as a reminder of how far I'd come and how much further I could go. As snow fell outside my window, just as it had that Christmas night when I drove away from my childhood home, I felt something settle within me. Not forgiveness, exactly, but acceptance. What had happened was painful, but had ultimately freed me from patterns that were holding me back. Sometimes, it takes losing everything to find out who you really are. Another Christmas approached, 18 months since my father's cruel announcement had turned my life upside down. The holiday season brought a mixture of emotions: pride in how far I'd come, lingering sadness about family fractures, and a new appreciation for the chosen family who had helped me rebuild. My career had continued to progress. I'd been promoted from junior to mid-level developer after completing several successful projects, and my salary had increased accordingly. My little apartment now felt like a true home, decorated with items that reflected my personality rather than just what I could afford in an emergency. This year, instead of dreading the holidays, I decided to host a small Christmas gathering, a dinner for the people who had supported me through the darkest period of my life. Madison and Riley would come, of course, along with Grandma L and a few friends from work and tech meetups. I spent days planning the menu, incorporating some of Mom's traditional recipes alongside new dishes I wanted to try. The apartment was festively decorated with a small tree, twinkling lights, and fragrant evergreen garlands. It wasn't elaborate, but it was warm and welcoming, a reflection of the life I was creating. 3 days before my planned dinner, an unexpected email arrived from my father. Seeing his name in my inbox sent a jolt through my system, a mixture of anxiety, anger, and a small, persistent thread of longing. Amber, it read. I hope this finds you well. It's been a long time, and I've heard through Patricia that you're doing very well in a technology career. I would like to meet, if you're willing. There are things I need to say to you in person. Please let me know if this would be possible. Dad. I stared at the screen, reading and rereading the brief message. No apology, no explicit acknowledgement of what he had done, but a request to meet. My immediate instinct was to ignore it, to protect myself from further hurt. But curiosity and that stubborn thread of hope gave me pause. After sitting with the email for a day, I discussed it during my regular therapy session. Dr. Martinez, who had been helping me process my grief and family trauma for over a year, offered a perspective I hadn't considered. Meeting with your father doesn't have to mean forgiveness or reconciliation, she pointed out. It could simply be an opportunity for closure, for saying things you haven't been able to say. The question is whether you feel strong enough to engage without being diminished by the interaction. I considered her words carefully. A year and a half ago, I had been devastated by my father's rejection, my sense of self-worth shattered. Now, I had rebuilt my life on my own terms. I had a career, a home, a support network. Perhaps I was strong enough to face him without being destroyed by whatever might transpire. I replied to the email, suggesting we meet at a coffee shop near my apartment. Neutral territory where I could easily leave if needed. He responded almost immediately, agreeing to the time and place I had proposed. The morning of our meeting, I dressed carefully, not to impress him, but to armor myself with confidence. I chose clothes that represented my new life, professional, put together, a far cry from the desperate young woman who had driven away from his house that Christmas night. He was already at the coffee shop when I arrived, seated at a table in the corner. He looked older than I remembered, his hair grayer, new lines etched around his eyes and mouth. When he saw me, he stood awkwardly, his hand half raised in an aborted wave. Amber, he said, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty I'd never heard before. Thank you for coming. I nodded, sitting across from him and ordering a latte from the server who approached. We sat in uncomfortable silence until our drinks arrived, neither quite knowing how to begin. You look well, he finally said. Patricia mentioned you're working for a technology company now? Yes, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. I'm a software developer. That's wonderful. I didn't know you were interested in that field. There's a lot you don't know about me, I said, more sharply than I'd intended. He flinched slightly, then nodded. I deserve that. I deserve worse, actually. He took a deep breath. Amber, I owe you an apology. What I did, how I treated you, was unforgivable. I waited, not making it easier for him. Melissa and I are divorcing, he continued when I didn't respond. I'm not telling you this to gain sympathy, but because it's forced me to reevaluate a lot of things, including how I let her influence me against you. You're an adult, I pointed out. You made your own choices. Yes, he agreed, surprising me. I did. I chose to listen to her instead of protecting my daughter. I chose to prioritize a new relationship over the most important one in my life. Those were my decisions, and I can't blame her entirely, though she wasn't the person I thought she was. He explained that Melissa had been secretly running up credit card debt, had alienated most of his friends and family, and had eventually had an affair with a real estate colleague. The divorce had been messy and was still ongoing, with financial entanglements that would take years to fully resolve. Again, I'm not telling you this for sympathy, he reiterated. Just to explain that I've had to face some hard truths about myself and my judgment. I sipped my latte, processing his words. Part of me felt a vindictive satisfaction in his misfortune, a sense that karma had delivered justice. But another part recognized the broken man before me, so different from the father I remembered from childhood. I don't know what to say, I finally responded. What happened hurt me deeply. I was homeless, Dad. I slept in my car in the middle of winter. I stayed in a shelter. Did you ever think about what might have happened to me? His face crumpled. I didn't know. Patricia told me you were staying with friends. I never imagined. He trailed off, visibly struggling with emotion. There's no excuse. None. I failed you completely. We talked for over an hour. I shared parts of my journey, not to reassure him, but to make him understand the consequences of his actions. He listened without interruption, occasionally wiping tears from his eyes. Near the end of our conversation, he asked hesitantly, "Would you consider coming to Christmas dinner? It would just be me this year. And maybe we could invite Eleanor too? I know I kept you both apart, and that was wrong." I considered the invitation. The thought of returning to that house, sitting at the table where he had humiliated me, felt impossible. But more importantly, I had my own plans now, my own celebration with people who had proven their loyalty and love. I can't do that, I said honestly. I'm hosting my own dinner for friends. And I'm not ready for that kind of family gathering yet. Maybe someday, but not now. His disappointment was visible, but he nodded in acceptance. I understand. Could we perhaps meet again sometime? Coffee or lunch? I'd like to try to rebuild some kind of relationship, if you're willing. I need to think about it, I replied. This isn't something I can decide today. We parted with an awkward goodbye, no hug or physical contact. As I walked back to my apartment, I felt lighter somehow. Not because everything was resolved, it wasn't, and might never be, but because I had faced my father on equal footing. I had spoken my truth without being diminished by his presence or approval. My Christmas dinner unfolded exactly as I had hoped. Grandma Elle arrived early to help with preparations, bringing Mom's old serving dishes she had saved. Madison and Riley came with wine and homemade cookies. Friends from work and tech meetups filled out the gathering, creating a warm, eclectic mix of people from different parts of my life. As we sat around my small dining table, extended with a folding table borrowed from a neighbor, Madison raised her glass in a toast. To Amber, she said, whose resilience continues to inspire me. From that day I found you in the bathroom to now, watching you create this beautiful life and gathering, I'm in awe of your strength. Tears pricked my eyes as everyone clinked glasses. The contrast between this Christmas and the last couldn't have been more stark. Then I had been rejected and alone. Now I was surrounded by genuine care and community. After dinner, as conversations broke into smaller groups around the apartment, Grandma Elle pulled me aside. "Your mother would be so proud of you," she said softly. "Not just for your success, but for how you've handled adversity. That's the true measure of a person." Later that night, after everyone had gone and I was cleaning up the last dishes, I reflected on all that had happened since that fateful Christmas dinner. The journey had been painful beyond words, but it had also been transformative. I had learned that family isn't always defined by blood, that sometimes the people who show up for you in crisis become more important than those who share your DNA. Madison, Riley, and Grandma Elle had demonstrated what true support looks like, given freely, without expectation of return. I had discovered resilience I never knew I possessed, the ability to start over with nothing and build something meaningful. Each small victory along the way, finding shelter, securing work, learning new skills, had reinforced my capability to overcome obstacles. Most importantly, I had learned to define success on my own terms. My father's cruel words, calling me a leech, implying I was failing at adulthood, had initially shattered my self-image. But piece by piece, I had reconstructed a sense of self based on my values and choices, not on others' judgments or timelines. As I placed the last clean dish in the cabinet, I looked around my small but comfortable apartment, at the remnants of the joyful gathering I had hosted, at the life I had created from the ashes of rejection. There was still healing to do, still questions about what role, if any, my father might play in my future. But those decisions would be made from a position of strength and self-determination, not desperation or obligation. Sometimes, being forced out of a situation that feels safe, even when it's not truly healthy, is the push needed to discover your own capabilities. Sometimes, losing everything clears space to build something better. And sometimes, the family you choose proves more nurturing than the family you're born into. As for my father, time would tell whether a new relationship might be possible. For now, I was content with the boundaries I had set and the understanding that any future connection would be on my terms, not his. Have you ever had to rebuild after hitting rock bottom? Did unexpected supporters emerge when you needed them most? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to join me as I continue sharing the journey of healing and growth. Remember that your worth isn't determined by anyone else's opinion of you, even family. Thank you for listening, and may you find the strength to rebuild when life knocks you down.